What's up guys? So today I'm shooting everything handheld and I'm shooting with the Sony ZV-E1 with an aps-c lens, which is the 12mm f2, and I'm just going to be walking around and just seeing how well this camera does with this lens when shooting in dynamic active mode. And the reason for this is because dynamic active mode is so smooth, it's kind of gimbal-like, and I thought it would be really cool just to have a lens like the 12mm, because when it crops in, it crops about the same focal length as the dynamic active mode. And just to give you an idea, this is what it looks like with the Samyang 12mm in full frame, and this is what it looks like with dynamic active stabilization. Now, as you can see, using this camera, it has a really good wide frame of view. I can easily fit myself in here if I'm just doing a vlog, and I couldn't do this with my full frame 20mm 1.8, and Sony doesn't really have a lightweight lens like the 20mm that's wider. And so that's why I decided to just go the aps-c route and use the 12mm. I think the 11mm is a little bit too wide, and I think you would probably have to crop in a little bit more in post. But with the 12mm, it's almost the perfect focal length. I may need to crop a little bit because if I move side to side here, you can kind of see on the edges, there's a little bit of vignetting. And if I actually add the lens hood on here, you're gonna see way more vignetting. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna walk around the city here and just kind of see how this lens performs, if you can use it as a substitute for a gimbal, because this lens is extremely lightweight, it's really portable, and it fits perfectly with a small body. Now, another thing to discuss here is just the size and weight of this lens. It's really nothing to kind of hold it up here. Right now I'm using a tripod and I can just bring it in towards me. I'm leaning the tripod and camera against my chest with using my elbow, and there's really nothing. I feel like I'm lifting nothing right now. I can put it further away from me to get a better angle of view, and it's still not that heavy to really hold in my hand. Now, another thing to consider with this lens is just the price. The price is way cheaper than the 11mm equivalent. Given the 11mm is wider and it's also a 1.8, but compared to my 20mm, the 20mm is an $800 lens. This lens goes for about $350. I got it used for $250. So it's a reasonably inexpensive lens, and it works great using the Sony ZV-E1. I recently got the Sony a6700, so I can also use this lens on that camera. So it's just the perfect lens for both a full frame camera and an aps-c camera. Now this lens will give me the full frame equivalent of about 18mm. If you buy the 11mm, that gives you an even wider frame of view, which is about 16mm, which you would think it wouldn't be that different, but when you multiply that by a crop factor of 1.5, the 11mm becomes a 16mm and the 12mm becomes an 18mm. So it's not the widest lens, but it's perfect for vlogging, and it's perfect for using this dynamic active stabilization with the Sony ZV-E1. And here's me just kind of panning back and forth here. I mean, it seems like it's pretty rock solid, it's pretty stable. I'm not noticing anything, maybe you're noticing something, so I'm gonna go home and just take a more in-depth look at it just to kind of see how the stabilization is doing. All right, so let's just see how the stabilization does going up this hill. Now, another reason to get this camera over the Sony 11mm 1.8 is it has less distortion, and you're probably going to get a little bit better lens flare on the 11mm, but as you go to the corners, you do notice a little bit of distortion with my face here, but you're not gonna see that as much with this lens. What are the cons of this lens? So unlike the 11mm, it doesn't have any custom buttons. If you use your lenses for custom buttons, I tend to not use the custom buttons on my lenses at all. I just use the custom buttons on the camera, so that's not a deal breaker for me. It also doesn't have a manual focus switch. You have to change it in camera, and that's something that's really nice about the 11mm is you have that auto and manual focus switch. I tend to use that all the time if I'm doing something like astrophotography. I think it's a good switch. This lens is also good for astrophotography, so if you're interested in doing that, I think it's a really reasonable lens to get, and you're not going to get as much vignette if you are shooting something with like landscapes with trees or something in the foreground. It's also just a little bit wider than the 11mm, so the 11mm is a little bit thinner, and it's a little bit taller than the 11mm. So it might just look a little bit bigger. The weight is pretty similar. I can't remember what it is exactly. I'll post it on the screen here, but they are very similar in size. And I know the 11mm is probably a better lens for most things in general, but it costs $550, whereas this lens you can get it for $350 and way cheaper if you plan on getting it used. But in my opinion, I think this is one of the best lenses to get if you have the Sony ZV-E1. If you want to use that dynamic active mode where you get that gimbal-like performance, this is the lens to get because there's hardly any crop. As you can see in my previous footage, like it doesn't really have that huge of a vignette on the edges. But for me, the main selling feature of this lens is just to be able to use an aps-c lens on a full frame camera and to be able to use that dynamic active image stabilization. I don't like gimbals because they're heavy, they're clunky, you have to set them up, it takes a lot of time to do all that. And with this lens, it's already on the camera, you just take it out and you walk around and you can use that dynamic active stabilization for any of your wide shots. And if you need anything closer, you can just put on a different lens, it's not gonna be a big deal. And the fact that this lens is so small and so lightweight makes it really reasonable for the price. And right now I'm actually shooting in aps-c mode, so I'm cropping in a little bit more than I would with the dynamic active stabilization. And it's just a really good talking head lens if you want to just do a talking head shot, or if you want to do vlogging. It has great build quality, it has really good handling, it fits the camera really well. Dustin Abbott does a really good lens review where he kind of talks up this lens and compares it side by side to the 11mm, which I'll put up here. So definitely check this lens out if you're interested, and be sure to subscribe if you continue to like videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one. I hope you have a great day.